Welcome back to another episode of I'm Really Into That Stuff. This is the podcast that features me, Jana Stern, psychic activator, energy healer, and astrologer, as I delve into deep conversations with different folks in the holistic and conscious industries about the many beliefs and practices of spirituality, mental health, and what it means to be a human who's into that stuff in the 2020s and beyond. I'm Really Into That Stuff is excited to tell you that we have won one of the top 10 Esoterica podcast spots on feedspot.com. Check out the whole list at blog.feedspot.com/esoterica_podcasts for the whole list. Thanks to our friends at Feedspot for this incredible honor. Welcome back to another episode of I'm Really Into That Stuff. I am your host, Jana Stern, and I am joined by the very sweet and very brilliant Danna. I'm so excited that you're here. You are the creator of the human design shadow, like everything. And I am really, really excited to dig into what shadow work is all about, how human design helps us kind of work through that, and who you are. So if you could share with my audience who you are and how you got into all that stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. That was such a nice intro. I will accept brilliant. Thank you. My name is Danna, and I create a human design shadow to... honestly, for myself. Like, it was a very selfish reason in the beginning. So a little bit about me and my background. I was born in Israel and moved to America when I was 8. In Israel, where I lived, just in the north, it's called a kibbutz. It's right on the border of Lebanon and Israel. And it was during the Gulf War, where we were constantly in bomb shelters, essentially. And as a small child, I didn't realize how much that had really affected me. And it was the beginning of the trauma, right? It was the beginning of my complex PTSD. And I kind of pushed it all aside, which I think we naturally do as children, and then even as adults, until I was about 30. And at 30, I call it like, that's when I came online. Like, I realized that I was alive. And I started going to therapy because I was like, the shit just doesn't feel right in here.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. And I realized that I had no memory of my childhood. I had no memory really of the past 30 years. Like, I got married, I had kids, obviously they were there. So I saw them, I remembered them, but vacations completely just wiped. There was really not much that I remembered from 30 years. So that made therapy a little bit more difficult. And then, I kept trying. I kept going to different, spiritual centers and trying different metaphysical things and different forms of therapy and different coaches and different healers. And I really feel like I did all of the things. Like, you named it, I did it. And nothing really seemed to work. So fast forward to COVID, I had gotten my kids a Halloween costume. And my son put on this costume. He got like a hazmat suit, COVID. And he put on the gas mask, and I had a panic attack.
Oy.
And I didn't even know what it was. I knew it was a panic attack, but I was like, what is happening? Like, I thought I had healed and cleared all this shit. And what that was a trauma that was in my body from when I was a very small child in Israel, and we had to wear the gas masks during the Gulf War. So I recognized then and there that there was a lot of work that still needed to be done, that it was deep in my body, and that the body really does keep the score. So I started working more with somatics, and I really looked to human design because I had been learning the system. I had been teaching the system. I had been coaching around the system, but it still felt like there was more depth to it than we were getting to. So for anyone that does not know what human design is, I say it's astrology on crack. Like, think about how you would look at astrology at your natal chart. Like, oh, cool. It tells me that I'm really good at this, and I'm really good at this, and I should do this, and I should do that. That's what human design is, except there's so many layers to it. So the human design body graph is essentially astrology, the Kabbalah, the Chinese I Ching, the chakra system, quantum physics, all in this one little chart. And it spits out your body in terms of your centers, which is kind of like chakras, but not exactly. And then all of your planets, the day you were born, 88 days before you were born, which is astrology, but they don't all have the same exact meanings. So this chart can tell us a lot about ourselves. But my problem was I wanted to know my past because I couldn't remember it. And I needed to know what was holding me back from going to my next level. What was causing me to be stuck in these toxic relationships? I'm now divorced at this point. So I started just digging into it and combining my obsession and knowledge of psychology and shadow work with human design and finding these parallels and these insights that were just so profound that it taught me so much about myself in terms of the way that I was behaving that was solely out of trauma, that was just a nervous system response. Because I have this center undefined, I am more likely to be an avoider. I'm more likely to be the strong one. I'm more likely to not show emotion. I'm more likely to, not speak the truth. And all of these different elements. And I was like, wow, I can trace all of these back to traumas that I know of. And even if I didn't know of it, I know that it's here. Something must have caused this. So that allowed me the validation, right? Because my parents still don't validate any of my trauma.
Thanks, boomers.
Yeah, right? I'm like, you were there.
Well, sometimes it's a coping mechanism, They're like, you're not traumatized and neither am I. Thank you so much.
Yes, for sure, for sure. And it's very much like, but we gave you the best. We did the best we could. I'm like, yes, and so it became a way for me to validate my own trauma because, it's that hidden wound of, but I had a great childhood. But like these horrible, horrible things didn't happen to me directly. So I had a great childhood. We do all this like comparing. So I really started to use human design to do that. Human design to see where I was behaving in ways that I thought was me. Like, this is who I am. But were actually trauma responses. And then healing those by going backwards, even without knowing my past.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's, I talk a lot on this podcast and in my life about, inner child work and shadow work, that deep, dark, what's below, like what's not just the, oh, I'm being a bitch right now, or I'm being avoidant, or I'm being, whatever it is, what has me being that way, what goes on underneath it. And the experiences of our lives have happened for us to teach us how to not show up like that. And oftentimes it's literally in the chart, like your destiny, your design is to work through this thing. But first you have to experience all these other things. And then you have to go into the woods and see what's really there. I'm curious how shadow work helped you to kind of move through yourself and your journey. Because, we'll talk about Israel in a minute. I'm Israel. Hi. Thank you so much, everybody. We're all alive. Thank you. I'm curious how shadow work has helped you to cope with all of the things that are now, like, have you brought them forward in your life? Do you have memory recall, or what does that look like now for you? Do you need the recall even?
No, so I have not recalled anything. I've spent a lot of time being very upset about my traumatized brain. And I talk about this a lot in different ways, but like having a traumatized brain affects everything.
Yes.
And I had such a hard time facing the fact that I was traumatized. But yet my brain kept telling me, like, you don't remember 30 years. Like, that's kind of a big deal. So I'm slowly coming to terms with the fact that maybe I don't need to remember. And maybe where I am right now is all I need to know. And that's why I can look at the body graph and say, okay, I know that this is me acting out of trauma because this is a not self behavior. I don't necessarily need to know the trauma to move forward. I just need to know that this is not me. But in terms of what you were saying, like, it's a lot about accepting it and just being aware of it. Like, okay, I've been acting this way, but it's not me. So how did I get here? Like, I can look at my parents and say, oh, that's how I got here, right? Like, I don't need to remember exactly what they did or what they said when I was 10 years old, because they haven't changed very much. And I can see it. I can see it so clearly. So I could be like, oh, that's right. That's why I don't trust people.
Got it. Can you speak to the not self and talk a little bit about it? Because it's such an interesting concept. There are sort of two things in human design that I'm always like, okay, tell me a little bit more, even though I've been studying for a while. One is the not self, and the other is your strategy. And we'll talk about strategy maybe in a minute, but I really want you to kind of break down what the not self is and how it shows up in the chart and how you can kind of move from the not self to the self and what the difference is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, great question. So the not self is basically conditioning. So we look at not self as not who we really are. It's who we have had to be in order to survive. And, I think Ra, who received the transmission of human design, he died a little bit too early to include a lot of trauma in his work. And I really think that that is a huge piece that we're missing. So he talks a lot about conditioning and how wherever we are open in the body graph, wherever you see blank, open, white space, that is where we amplify the energy of others by 200%. So he talks about that being conditioning, because obviously we're always being conditioned by the forces around us, by people around us. I think the really important piece to that is missing is the trauma piece, the piece that I had to be this to survive. So with the term conditioning, I think there's this like negative connotation that like, I fucked up. I did something wrong. I let you condition me. I let you do this to me. I developed this thinking. So I really try to shift that perspective from I let this happen, or I'm bad, I'm dirty because I'm conditioned, to this is who I had to be to survive. Without this, I wouldn't have survived. That's how smart I am. But what has taken me here will not take me to the next level. So what has to pivot? What has to change? And then the work that we really do is around, a lot of times, removing the fear that we've developed, the conditioned fear, the not self fear around that change, around why we've learned that we cannot be ourselves. And that's where the shadow work comes in. So I try to make that distinction between the deconditioning work in our openness and then the shadow work in our definition. So a lot of human design analysts don't talk about the definition as also being a shadow frequency. So in our definition, that is where we're defined, where those centers are colored in, where the planets are on each side. That is who we are. But if we are operating out of the not self of our openness, meaning our trauma responses, our survival mechanisms, then who we are is going to be affected by that too, right? It's like when you're sick, your whole body is sick and tired, and, it affects your entire body, not just half of your body.
Right.
So it's the same thing with human design. So even in our definition, I think a lot of people look at the definition, they're like, oh, well, this is who I am. These are my strengths. Like, why aren't I living these strengths? There's something wrong with me. I'm wrong. I'm bad again. And really, it's just that the openness has affected your definition. And then you've learned that whatever that strength is, whatever that wisdom is likely not good enough, right? So we want to know where we learn that. And that's the shadow work.
Yeah, beautiful. Human design is such a beautiful practice because, I've been learning and studying and even teaching and whatever astrology for a while now, about 10 years, like pretty seriously, and intensely, certainly since COVID. And what I know about astrology is that it gives you a really good blueprint to understand how you were designed, right? And I think living by our design is such an important thing. And when I got to human design through the pathway of astrology, I was really enthralled because it does include all these other things that are so, part of what I was already knowing. I mean, all the other modalities, they fit so perfectly. And this piece about the not self, about this self that you show up as, and that as you're showing up as that, you're like, oh, here I go again. Right? You're like,
Yeah.
especially if you're a conscious person, you can almost in the moment be like, I know that I'm being a piece of shit. I know that I'm acting wounded. I know that I'm acting, helpless, hopeless. I know that I'm being domineering. I know that I'm being kind of a tyrant, or that I'm being avoidant, or that I'm like putting on a smile, or just using my coping mechanisms. And I love how the specific gates really give you the opportunity to understand exactly why. Do you want to speak a little bit about some of those gates? I know that for people who are into human design, they're always looking at their gates and their channels, which as we're speaking, I know people who don't understand human design are like, what are you fucking talking about, guys? But if you're curious, go and have a look at your birth chart and like at your human design chart and book a call with you
Yeah.
so that you can learn more. But do you want to sort of chat a little bit about some of the gates that, maybe play up our likelihood to act those ways? Like, are there some gates that are more likely that you're going to be kind of this like victim cycle repeater versus not? Because there are people in the world, to my eye, that seem like they're fine. They're fine. And is that in the chart?
Yeah. That's a great question. I don't know that that's in the chart. Like, it's in the chart. I'm sure like who they are is in the chart, but the fact that they are not affected by these things is something that I've also been playing around with, because I'm not sure, honestly. Like, I know people that I'm like, how are you normal? Like, how are you so like not offended or like wounded by any of this shit?
Unbothered.
Yeah, unbothered. Great word. Yeah.
My dream. I could not. It's nowhere in my chart. Wherever it is, I don't have it. I mean, I don't have everything, but I don't. Whatever that thing is, it's not for me.
I think part of it is like they don't show it. They
Sure.
are so far removed from it
Right.
that their brain literally cannot handle it. Their body cannot handle it. There's
Like your
no way.
parents, right? So, like, I'm fine, you're fine, we're fine, it's all fine. Everything is fine.
Yes. We don't go in the past. We live in the present. And they just trudge on, right?
Even though the present is kind of shitty, they're just like, but it's fine.
Yeah. Because they have to be fine, right? They learn that they have to be fine. And I do find that a lot of that is like, that's the mindset of immigrants also. Like,
Sure.
It's fine. Everything's fine. Like, it could be way worse. They're always saying it could be way worse. Thank God it's not way worse. And also they have this, like, the family that they've left behind in their ear, like, oh, everything's got to be fine. So I think there is a piece that like they just can't look at it. And that's fine. So maybe it's like pretending to be normal. Usually we can see it in like their addictive tendencies. Everything's fine. I'm totally normal, but I get drunk every single night at the bar.
Right. Or I eat like shit on purpose every single night, or I smoke too many cigarettes or too much weed or whatever the thing.
But everything's fine.
Everything's fine. Can't put my phone down. Everything is fine.
Yes, exactly. So, we do see it. We just don't always poke the bear. And that's fine. What was the question you asked me before that? It was about gates. So I pride myself on the work that we do in human design being not the basic bitch human design. So there's a lot of, if you Google human design, like, Lord, you will find so much stuff. And it really gets very old for me. And like, it's very like regurgitated, and it becomes very annoying for me. So I try to find like different ways of saying old things or even new things. Like, a lot of the stuff that we talk about is things that we've experimented and researched, and Ra doesn't necessarily talk about it. And so we try to give some different perspectives, because I really do think that the way you say something or the perspective that you give, even if it's around a subject you've thought about a gajillion times, it takes just one moment to change everything. So the perspectives that I have around the gates are that I like to look at the Gene Keys book as well as human design. So Gene Keys is essentially, I call it a romantic version of human design, right? It's just like a poetic, more spiritual, more in depth. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's very wordy, but it's very delicious if you're open to that sort of thing. So I try to look at the shadow aspect of all of the gates, I'm sorry, and then also their gift aspect. I don't necessarily go into city, but that might be a conversation for another time because it takes me down a different rabbit hole. Um, and the gates that I like to look at the most when I have a reading with someone is, well, first it depends what they're going through, but I love unconscious Mars. So unconscious Mars is going to be in red and it's going to be on the left-hand side. And what we've learned from Gene Keys and human design and through my research and experimentation is that unconscious Mars holds 3 different frequencies. One is generational trauma. The next is the core wound, the wound that we've come into this planet with. And the third is our shadow genius. So, generational trauma, what we've learned through psychology is that, 80 to 90% of our woundings are generational. And I don't know if you've read this book, Emotional Inheritance by Galit Atlas.
No, but it sounds like something that a Galit would write because we're definitely inheriting it.
Oh my God. It was phenomenal. Like, I highly, highly, highly recommend that book to everyone. Obviously, she's Israeli, but
I'll put it in the link below.
She talks about generational trauma and how we are affected by it without even knowing, how we repeat all of these cycles, whether they're cycles of physical situations and circumstances or emotions, or, anything from like affairs to sexual abuse to pregnancies at certain ages based on generations past. So I find that the unconscious Mars gives us a lot of insights into generational trauma. And then it also gives us insights into our own core wound, that thing that we're here to really heal. And then underneath all of that is our shadow genius. And the shadow genius is one of the many geniuses that we're here to embody. And without knowing what that is, we kind of are lost in like the direction of where to go. So that is what we do the shadow work on. That's always fun to understand. I love to look at Saturn, both conscious and unconscious. I call that the punish me daddy gates because that's like, it hurts so good, right? When we sabotage ourselves. Punish me daddy.
Especially if you have daddy issues.
Yes, and we'll get to that in a second.
Some of us have been there their whole lives.
See, mine are mommy issues.
Oh, that's nice. I have both.
Oh, that's great. I love that for you.
Thank you. I love my mommy, but there's always stuff.
There's always stuff. That's the thing. There's always stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The punish me daddy gates are where we sabotage ourselves, where we hurt ourselves, where we punish ourselves for whatever reasons. So how that plays out is going to be your Saturn gates. And then I also love Pluto. Like, I know a lot of people don't, they're like, is Pluto still a planet? I don't know. But I really love Pluto. It has never failed me in terms of like someone's purpose, the transformation they're meant to have on the planet. Of course, there's nuances to everything. Is it in an undefined center? Is it in a defined center? But Pluto can really give you a lot of insights into the transformation that you're here to create for yourself and potentially for others.
Yeah, when I read astrology, I include Pluto always because I also include tons of different asteroids and all these other things. So of course Pluto is in the mix. And what I always say is because it's generational in that like very slow moving kind of way, it is very much a part of what we're collectively here for, to understand what is the role that we're all playing together generationally, and where do we push forward through this collective fuckery that we're trying to process, together as a species, because we're seeking for collective consciousness to evolve and rise up. And Pluto is definitely playing a role in that, whether or not it's like a planet or not. It's sort of almost as irrelevant from my astrological perspective. But yeah,
I agree with that.
When you were sharing earlier about this book that you were talking about, I talk a lot about how we keep 7 generations of trauma in the body and that the genetics of us really are affected. And I know that they show up in the human design chart. Like, I know that I heard somebody say not too long ago that your grandmother's chart shows up in your chart.
Skips generation.
Right. Like they kind of rhyme. Are they identical? Is that how that works?
No, they're not identical, but there are a lot of similarities. Like my son and my mother's chart are very similar.
Hmm.
There's also similarities in their personality. I call that like my karma.
Uh-huh.
And then my daughter is very similar chart to my ex-mother-in-law, which is also my karma, I guess. But yeah, it does skip a generation. So if you're looking for comparisons, that's why I'm like, we don't always have to know. Like
Right.
we're collective that needs all the information. Give me all the information and I need to know for sure. I need to know. And that's a traumatized brain, right? Like that's how I know we have traumatized brain. There's no gray thinking. It's all black and white. I need to know. I can't survive in the unknown. Give me certainty. So human design does give us that level of certainty that I find really helps people heal some of that trauma, but we don't always know. Like our grandparents, a lot have passed. We don't know. We can't ask them. Also, it's the silent trauma, right? That no one talks about, that no one in the family is allowed to know about. Those tend to be the worst kinds. Those tend to be the ones that we hold on to and we have no idea what it is or where it's coming from. So we blame ourselves. But also, if we can just be a little bit open minded and maybe more fluid in the process, and we know that our grandparents' charts are similar to ours, what might that mean? What could that mean? Where can I relieve some pressure on myself there?
I have like the most curious question, and I don't even know how to begin with this research, but there's a healing that I do called the life activation. And it's actually a 3,000-year-old healing that began in the Temple of King Solomon before the wall was just a wall, when it was a full temple. And it is a DNA healer. And it literally activates the DNA from the inside out. We have no idea why it works, but I know that it does. I've seen people transform their lives over and over and over and over and over again. I've life activated many people, and every single one of them within a year, a calendar year, they're a different person. I mean, there's definitely life activation practitioners not too far from you, and I can connect you with somebody, or you can fly on up to Toronto. I'm not super far. So whichever you prefer. But I wonder if you've seen, because I know you said that you've done, other metaphysical healings and things of that nature. Have you seen people change and show up as the self more when you add in other kinds of healing to the process? Like, I know that everything is everything and everything all works together, but what have you specifically seen in those ways, if at all?
Yeah. This is not an answer that I necessarily like, but I combine a lot of different processes and different things into what I do. But I do find that the biggest change that I see in people comes with the mind, with awareness, like understanding, right? So like we want to go into the body, and I love somatic work and I think it's so helpful, but I do find that like somatic work with the mental work is really powerful. Because, nowadays we're like, oh, well, everything's stored in the body. So just go into the body, just do the body. But like we still have this mind that always gets in the way. So my kind of motto is let's make the mind our ally. Like let's let the mind understand. Let's give the mind all the information at once. And then we can move into the body because the mind is satisfied. So I don't know that there's any specific spiritual practices or embodiment work that I've seen work better than what happens when we get the mind on board to understand, because we have traumatized mind. We can't ignore it.
Right. One of the things that I'm like sitting with and feeling into right now is that intergenerational trauma that you and I both experience. And you experience it differently because you lived in Israel as a child, and I've not lived there. I've only been on birthright 10 days of my life, though. I've only spent 10 days and the world wants to hold me accountable. We'll leave that alone. Anyway, one of the things that I wonder, and I think about this a lot because the trauma comes up for me in these really interesting ways. My body remembers. So we are, in my family, pogrom Jews, not Holocaust Jews. My great grandparents came over. My great grandfather was a teeny tiny baby. My great grandmother was born in Canada. My grandparents were born here. My mother was born here, and I'm born here. So my great great grandparents lived in this country. And yet, October 7th, my body was like, oh, I know this. And I wonder if it's possible, and I think this thought a lot. I wonder if it's possible for us as Jews, but also, anybody who's experienced intergenerational trauma, Black folks, people, who have experienced trauma through generations and generations, immigrants of other kinds, the Irish, certainly Native people. Can we get to a place where we're not traumatized, where we're not collectively living? Is it possible for us to live as the self collective?
No. From my knowledge of like I used to study spiritism. It was Caribbean spiritism. But from my understanding about the universe, and if we were to look at it from a very like spiritual perspective, the earth is just not at that vibration to have that kind of energy. I think it's a learning place, right? Like it's a school. Like we're here to learn. If we were all operating from our highest selves, what would we learn? It would just be it would be too fun. Nobody has time for that much fun.
Make the time, guys. Fun is fun.
Yes. I think we're here to help each other heal, right? But as we do that, like even me with the knowledge that I know, of course I'm still traumatizing my children. Like not on purpose, obviously. But also we're so sensitive to different things that the smallest thing can be traumatizing, right? Like we could say, I was in the bathroom while my baby was crying and that traumatized the baby. It's like I say, none of us are getting out of this life untraumatized.
Yeah, I agree with you. One of the things that I sort of like speak about in the abstract when I really can like look forward into something beyond where we are is that maybe in the true age of Aquarius, like in 250 years from now, when Pluto comes back to where it's hanging out, we might experience that. We might be ready.
We're getting closer.
Yeah, I think we are getting closer, and I think we're alive and awake at this time to go there. But it's fucking depressing to think that I'm going to live the rest of my life knowing that we're all just going to be sort of like dragging our feet through the mud of trauma for a lifetime. And potentially there are people who will never experience healed versions of themselves. And a lot of times when clients come to me, they're like, when does this end? And I'm like, you get to the top of the mountain to ascend. Like death is when it's over, when you are
for everyone.
And even, by the way, when you're dead, there's still work to do because you show up for others to help them on their journey. Like it's never over, right?
Right. That's why we just make peace with it.
Right.
So there's a gate 10 in the body graph is a love gate. And it's called an anti-mundane love gate and also a mundane love gate. Anti-mundane
is where my Neptune is.
Perfect. So anti-mundane means that it's not personal. It loves the world for the ugliness and the beauty of it, right? I love being in the world just for what it is. And then the personal aspect of that is I love me in the world as the world is. And it takes a minute to get there. And I think we get there through loving ourselves, through being exactly who we are. And there's only so much I can do, right?
Yeah, it's like the beautiful nuance of existence. Like, I did the Landmark Forum a million years ago, like probably 12, 15 years ago. And they would say life is empty and meaningless. And that's like, and that's beautiful or something. I'm paraphrasing. But yeah, this idea that like there's nothingness here and it's empty and meaningless, but also it's the purpose of being here is to let yourself just have emptiness and to be happy with things exactly as they are, even if they're fucking bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the individual energy, right? Like we have circuitries in human design, which are basically energy families to your definition. And the individual energy it can be very melancholic because of how mundane life really is. And can we find the beauty to it without needing to have all of this excitement and all of this drama and something to happen and mutation? And am I going to be the one that creates the next amazing thing, right? So we have all of this pressure around it, which creates more of the melancholy and more of the depression. And it is hard. It is hard to just, love the day-to-day stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's to me why, healthy habits and routines are so important, because if I don't have a morning journal session with myself where I can like dump the thoughts and start my day right, then yeah, like it's going to be real hard to climb the mountain throughout the day. What helps you to be in yourself instead of your not self?
Honestly, the gym is so powerful for me. Like, okay, so I have the 2838, which is the channel of struggle.
Mm.
So struggle naturally happens in my body and in my mind. So when I go to the gym and I allow my body to handle that struggle with my defined root, with my defined sacral, all of my energy centers, if I allow that struggle to come through the gym, then I find that I struggle less with my mind. Do I still overthink? Yes, I'm a chronic overthinker, but I catch myself, right? Like, and that's the point. Like, even Ross said, none of us are going to avoid conditioning forever, right? We can't avoid it. It's always there. It's just how quickly can I catch myself in it? And can I pivot? Can I make that shift? So for me, I have an undefined solar plexus. So that is empathy. That is feeling other people's emotion. It is sensitivity. I also have, a feeling cognition. So I am very sensitive. And for someone that grew up as the strong one and don't cry and don't have feelings and don't share your feelings, that was a really hard pivot to make. And I'm still making that pivot. I'm not 100% there yet. But it's knowing that about myself, but also allowing the people in my life to know that about me too. That way I don't have to pretend to be something else. Like, the people that are close to me know that I'm really sensitive, and they know that if I don't get my 24 hours of alone time, or if I'm peopling too much, like, I need to go back into my space, and they know that, so they don't push me on it, and they don't, challenge me. And I think it's really important to have those kinds of people around you because they help stabilize you.
100%, without a doubt. I am exactly who I am because the people who support me to be who I am and have gotten me from who I was to who I'm trying to be. And I rely very heavily on the people in my world to keep me centered. Talk to me a little bit about strategy. What is it? How do you do it? How do you know if you're doing it? There's a beat that I'm missing about strategy. People are always like, "Are you living by your strategy?" I'm like, I don't fucking know if I'm living by my strategy. Okay.
So strategy is basically to help us make decisions, right? It's to help us move through the world in an effortless way with the least amount of resistance. So you're a generator, right?
I'm a 5/1 projector.
You're a projector.
I'm an emotional projector. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Ross said some pretty mean things about emotional projectors.
Yeah, we're fucked up, man.
Yeah. Are you a single definition or a split?
Single.
Okay. So you're better. That's fine. You win. So strategy is basically like how we're meant to respond to life. So we're all responding.
No, I'm wrong. I'm a split.
Oh, okay.
So sorry.
I'll share this horrible quote with you later.
Yeah, just share with me now. It's fine. They know me, whoever they are. They're listening. They know what it is.
I don't want to paraphrase because I will butcher it. But he basically says he's like, if I had to make a list of the most fucked up people on the planet, emotional projectors who are split definition would be at the top of that list.
Oh, hey guys, what's up? Like I said, it's not in my fucking chart. It's just not in my chart. Not whatever it is.
He says, it's like riding the Titanic, and you go down with the ship. I mean, there's nothing like an emotional projector to plug in at the wrong times. They're so good at plugging in at the wrong times that, we should film that and show it to people because it's really something to see. The emotional projector, high on their wave, plugging into the most horrendous piece of shit. I guess this is in terms of relationships as well. And thinking that it's heaven and waking up in the morning and knowing that it was not heaven. Oh, they will take in people that, Mother Teresa wouldn't take these people into their lives.
Thanks, Rob.
It's so interesting. Like, I laugh. Obviously this is personal, but I love his way of saying things in such like a blunt, frank manner. Like, it's so me. It's so like Israel. It's so Israeli,
yes,
right?
Very Israeli.
Yeah, which is what I do. And, that was one of my conditionings is that when I got to this country, my friends would say, you can't do that here. We're American. Like, you can't talk like that. Like, if you want to talk about someone, you say it behind their back, not to their face. Like, you don't tell people the truth. You don't have to say everything that's on your mind. So I lived that way for a really long time. And I was like, this fucking sucks. Like, this feels awful. So, like, I've built my entire business on, like, I will challenge you. I will push you. I will tell you the truth. You don't have to agree with me. I'm not always right. I'm definitely not always right. But you'll definitely get a perspective that no one else will tell you. So that's like moving from your conditioned self, who I had to be survive high school, into like who I really am. Like, this is just who I am.
So we were talking about strategy.
Yeah. So we all respond. And I think we have this, we grow up thinking that if we want something, we got to go out there and get it. And we're all conditioned to just go out there and get it. And different types work different ways. So depending on your connections in your centers, it will tell you what type you are in human design. So we have manifestors, generators who are generators, and then manifesting generators. Then we have projectors, and then we have reflectors. So manifestors, while they have the energy to initiate and go out and get what they want, they're still waiting to respond to something emotionally happening, right? They're still waiting to respond to something. They're not just like, they have to respond to something. It's not just like go and get it.
Mm-hmm.
Projectors are essentially waiting for the invitation, but that invitation looks like so many different things. And I think people really get tripped up with, well, what kind of invitation? Will I get it in the mail? Like, what will it look like? And Rod did say, you know, if you want to take your practice really seriously, then wait for an actual invitation. Like, I invite you to this podcast. But you can also play around with how things feel and how people respond to you. So I used to have a client who was a projector, and she said that when people hugged her, that was an invitation for her. And then she knew she could engage with this person or be really open with this person. Because the thing with projectors is that they have penetrating auras. When you and I are talking, like, it's penetrating, right? Like, I feel you looking deep into my soul. And a lot of people don't like that. So that's why projectors need to wait for the invitation. Their energy is too potent for a lot of people, and people can't handle it.
Correct.
So if you interject your energy where people are closed off to it, then you're going to meet a lot of resistance. So it's basically, how can I meet less resistance in the world? So waiting for the invitation. For generators, manifesting generators, it's waiting to respond, which is almost like too easy. It's annoying. Like, waiting to respond is, I could literally respond to anything because things are happening all the time. It's just, am I responding with my authority? So my authority is the sacral, which is it a huh or is it a yes or no, depending on your definition. And then reflectors have to wait an entire lunar cycle, which is a lot. But I think there's a common misconception that that's like with everything. You don't have to wait 29 days to figure out what you're having for lunch, right? Those are just big life events.
Right. You know, it's funny. So as a projector, I wish I had known this as a child. I wish I had known all of this stuff as a kid, because then I would have been very clear on what was and was not for me, because I used to all the time interject myself into places and into people's energies in a way that was very, very invasive, and I never knew. And I have a big voice and a tone of voice that I don't always hear. And I made lots of friends, but probably just as many enemies because I didn't know. And starting my understanding of human design and to understand what it means to respond and wait for the invitation, I'm getting better and better and better at understanding that when I go to brunch at a restaurant and then I get an email from them that says, we're doing breath work with this person and meditation with this one, and we're doing this thing over here as part of our event, like venue, that's an invitation for me to be like, hey, see, that's an invitation for me to be like, I can contribute here. Like, this is something that I do too, and I can show up here. And if the person likes my energy, then it might move forward, right? But it's so hard to know these things if you don't understand your design. It's a huge part of why I'm such a proponent for, you need to know what the map looks like, whatever map it is you're following, so that you can be like, this is what I'm here for, or I'm just trying at something that's going to crash and burn?
I agree with you. It's important to know, I think, the foundations. But then, something that I always say to my clients is like, as with any system, like, let's hold it lightly or like with open fingers so it can drip out, because it's still so personal. Like, it's still so like, let's not try to put ourselves in this box. Like, oh, you left religion and now you're looking into human design, but don't create another dogma for yourself, Don't put yourself in another box. Like, even with human design, it's so nuanced and you still do it your way. Like, I had a client tell me once, she has a sacral authority and she's like, I don't hear my sacral. For me, it comes from my heart. And I was like, does that work for you? She's like, yeah. I was like, great. Keep doing that. Right? Like, do what works for you. And especially with clients that are projectors, I have them keep a log of when they know they consciously responded and it was a yes, and what happened. They consciously responded or accepted the invitation. It was a no, and what happened. Because hindsight's 2020, and we start to see these patterns play out if we write it down. Like, if you take the time to actually write it down, you can start to see the patterns. Oh, this is what the invitation looked like. This is how I responded, and this is what happened.
I love that a lot. And I'm banking it over here for later. Tell me a little bit about the human design shadow, like, system that you've created, how it all works, and, what your intention is with it going forward.
My big vision for human design shadow is to get it out to more people. But what we've been playing around with, so I created the human design shadow training basically because people wanted to know how I did what I did. I started to do all these shadow readings and people loved it and they were getting results and they were like, I want to learn how to look at a chart the way that you look at a chart. And at first I was like, I don't know how to teach this. Like, this is just in my brain. I don't know. So it was a no for me for a while. And it finally kept coming back when people were asking me for it. So I created the human design shadow training, and it has evolved over the last few years. We're in our 6th round right now, and we run several every year. And what I'm starting to see is, like, in this round, we have 4 therapists. We have psychologists and service providers that really want to bring this to their clients, to traditional medicine and in a different way. And I really, really love that. And I really love that human design shadow can be a nuanced part of that, because sometimes people don't fit into a mold. And that's the big message here, right? Is that we don't fit into a mold. And the more that we try to make ourselves fit into these boxes like everybody else in order to belong, the less that we do. So it's really about embracing who we really are, releasing who we've had to be, making friends with that part, right? Like, it's fine, it got us here, but embracing our uniqueness and then bringing that uniqueness to the world in new ways. So my big vision for HDS is that it would be part of, therapists, like their protocol, right? Or at least small elements of it that they can use with their clients. Because I am seeing more and more therapists are using human design in their practice. But if we can bring in some of these shadow elements, some of these trauma elements, and then, combine their knowledge and their degrees and whatever they do with that, I think it can be really, really potent for people to see themselves and make those pivots.
That's incredible. I've done a lot of therapy in my life. You're like, yeah, I saw that. And I had wished then that many of the therapists that I had seen over a lifetime, I started therapy when I was 3. Yeah, my father was institutionalized. My mother was scared that it was going to fuck us up. And so she put me into therapy at a very young age. And I had seen many different therapists over a lifetime. And I always wished that they could see me the way that somebody who understands human design or astrology or any of the sort of metaphysical tools or that stuff can see me. And so I love that this is all kind of like weaving in. I love the consciousness, getting put into, Western medicine, melting in with the Eastern medicine. And there's a ton of Eastern medicine in human design. So I love it. I love it.
I find that a lot. And me personally, I'll just say for me, like, what I wish my therapist had said were like, stop trying to be like everybody else. Like, look, you're different. You do things way different than everybody else, you're never going to fit in. Like, I've done so much work around fitting in and belonging with, Brene Brown. And again, I come back to my body graph and I'm like, it's literally fucking here. I will never fit in. Like, that's why I've literally created my own community of people that accept me.
Amazing.
I just think I'm just different, and as you are too. Like, I'm sure you have found that, like, anybody that does this work, stop trying to fit in with the normies, right? Like, Ra calls the individual energy the freak. He's like, you're just a freak. You are not like anybody else. You're not meant to be like anybody else. You're meant to bring in that freak flavor, but it comes at a cost.
Yeah, I always say, like, I was never, ever, ever meant to walk the path. I was meant to dance with the fairies on the side of the path someplace and just be a little bit lost.
How painful it is to try to belong to a society that wants to control you. Like, I was an accountant. I do love morning work.
I wish I had known that you and this you. I have a dear friend that was a caterer, and now she does tantric teaching, and she still cooks when she leads retreats, but those two people are very different people. And it's clear that, even though I'm sure it shows up in some ways, I'm sure you're counting on your business end is perfect.
Oh, yeah. I still dabble. And you know what? That's the manifesting generator in me. Like, I like to have these different outlets, and there's something about data and numbers that I could just get lost in. But yeah, they're definitely different.
For sure. Is there anything that you want to share with my listeners that we haven't chatted about yet? Anything that you just like, any final thoughts that you want to share?
I mean, I think one of my biggest messages and I'll say it's for myself too, like constantly for myself, because everything that I put out there, I first do for me. And that's very generator. But it's just to become aware of your patterns and recognize how they have helped you get to where you are. And sometimes it's just that awareness is all of the shadow work, right? Like, a lot of people are like, well, what do I need to do? Tell me what to do. Give me the process. And I can give you the process. I love a good process. I love a good framework. But also sometimes it's literally just having the awareness that, oh my God, I am avoidant because my mother never showed me any love, because she came from a very cold German family. And you kind of go down the line, like, can you understand why your mom is the way she is? Can you understand why your grandparents can be? And just having acceptance and awareness, and you don't have to forgive anyone, but just understanding how that might play out in you and just letting that be for a little while, instead of having to push and change and fix. How do I fix myself? Like, you're not broken. We're working on shit. We're in the process. But I find that just becoming aware of it is really key, in accepting it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much. This has been such a beautiful, and yeah, you really are so brilliant, and such a wonderful conversation. Thank you. Tell people where they can find you and how they can support you in your business.
So you can find me on Instagram is where I like to play the most. So my handle is at this.is.Danna, Danna. And then humandesignShadow.com. We have the Human Design Shadow training that is more business-based that we run several times a year. And then we have Human Design Shadow for self-healing that is personal. I like to make that distinction because we always try to monetize everything. And I like to, let's focus on you. Like, let's just do you and take money out of the picture and, take your clients out of there. So that's Human Design Shadow for self-healing, HDSS. And then I always have different classes on there that you can buy also to get introduced to this work. I have the shadow chart and the shadow report that you can download. One is free, one is a paid report, just to kind of get your feet wet in this work.
Very, very cool. I love it. Thank you so much. This is so exciting. All the links are going to be down below, so feel free to click around down there and learn as much as you possibly can. Danna is a beautifully talented, as you can see, very knowledgeable human being on all of this stuff. Appreciate you being here. Thank you to all of our listeners. We will be back in another couple of weeks with another episode of I'm Really Into That Stuff. Appreciate you all. Thanks for listening to another episode of I'm Really Into That Stuff. You can follow along with us on Instagram at I'm Really Into That Stuff, or on Twitter at That Stuff Pod. And be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. If this episode resonated with you and something that you're really into, share it with someone you love. Sending you strength, peace, love, and light until our next episode.